To be insidious means to progress gradually but with inevitable harm, or having hidden harm, as if sitting in an ambush.
Insidious Chapter 4, The Last Key, is actually a solid entry in the Insidious franchise, which doesn't feel repetitive or redundant to its predecessors. Which is surprising because horror franchises usually don't seem to keep their quality up to such a far point in the franchise itself. I myself was also very skeptical when I saw the trailer of this film.
I think this is just going to be a gigantic jump scare fest, and if good at all, as good as 3.
This is because I wasn't too big of a fan of the third part. The thing is, the first 2 Insidious parts, they revolved around a family called the Lamberts. A father and mother with their 2 children having to deal with a supernatural world called the Further that kept involving itself into their life and turning it into a living hell. In part 1, they hire a ghost hunter called Elise and her 2 technical assistants to deal with their job. So while the first 2 parts are just about the Lambert family dealing with their paranormal issues, all of a sudden you have part 3 that only deals with Elise, the paranormal detective they hired in part 1. So I got the feeling at the time like we've been cheated. It felt like somebody took the X-Files, killed off Mulder and Scully, and made a show about Agent Skinner before he met Mulder and Scully and just called it the X-Files. But seeing how Insidious just generally tied in with a bunch of other movies like The Conjuring or Annabelle and became this entire cinematic universe in the horror genre called the Conjuring franchise, one couldn't actually even see past that. Another issue I had with part 3 was that its ending was overall pretty cheesy and corny, and didn't really fit the tone of the other films at all. Now when I found out Insidious 4 was also going to be about the paranormal investigator Elise, I was preparing myself for a catastrophe. But I didn't get that at all. Instead, I got a solid film that was much scarier and much more dynamic and had a better story than part 3 altogether. If we would ignore the first 2 parts of Insidious, one could say that the new Insidious movies have taken this new direction. It is like somebody took Miss Marple or Angela Lansbury and just put her into a paranormal world. Because Elise Rayner really fits into that role of the lovable old lady with her 2 young friends, and she actually manages to carry the film very well as a lead. This is one where one has to give big credit to Lin Shaye, who is 74 years old, and is actually carrying an entire franchise. And this time Elise gets a case where she has to travel back to her old childhood home and face the demons that she met back there when she was a child. This gives the franchise the chance to finish the film exactly where part 1 of the whole entire story starts. The cinematography department here does an amazing job because the look of the film is exactly how the other parts of the franchise look like. It also has some stunning little eye candy. I'm not going to spoil too much about because you really have to take a look. The effects here are great. Keep in mind, this is a high-budget horror film. You are sadly going to get an unnecessary amount of jump scares. It's not like they're shoving them down your throat. It's like 3 or 4 to be in total, but they're still there, and they're fucking annoying. This is not a film that is flawless. By far not. It has a very anticlimactic ending. Some of the comedy they try to pull with Elise's 2 paranormal sidekicks doesn't really work most of the time. When it does, it works totally great, but let's say half the time, it's a bunch of silly jokes that don't really make anybody laugh as much. All in all, it is nice to see a franchise that is in its 4th part already still keep such a solid performance and having such a good quality all in all. This movie may be called The Last Key, but I am sure that this is definitely not the last of what we've seen of the Insidious films, since the Insidious films now definitely tie into something that we call the Conjuring universe, and we have another film coming out this year called The Nun, which is part of that family. This is a nice, entertaining horror flick one should check out, but one shouldn't really expect too much of either. This is a fun watch.